The handcuffs clicked around Pastor Marcus Riley's wrists with a metallic finality that echoed through the stunned silence of Mount Olive Baptist Church. 300 pairs of eyes watched in horrified disbelief as two police officers dragged their beloved pastor down the center aisle, his Sunday robes trailing behind him like a wounded bird's wing. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across the sanctuary floor where moments before children had been singing "This Little Light of Mine" with voices pure as angel song. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Jenkins barked, his voice cutting through the sacred space like a blade through silk. The congregation sat frozen, their hymnals still open to page 47, their voices caught in their throats like trapped birds. Mrs. Ethel Washington, 83 years old and a pillar of the church for 6 decades, clutched her pearl necklace so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her grandson, Jamal, home from Howard University for the weekend, shot to his feet, his pre-law instincts kicking in. "On what charges?" Jamal's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying the authority of his legal training despite his youth. "What probable cause do you have for this arrest?" Officer Rodriguez, younger than his partner, but with eyes already hardened by years of patrol work, turned toward the congregation with a sneer that could have curdled fresh milk. "Unlawful assembly, operating without proper permits, creating a public disturbance." Each word dropped like stones into still water, creating ripples of anger and confusion throughout the packed sanctuary. Pastor Riley, 45 years old, with premature gray threading through his close-cropped hair, had spent the last 15 years building Mount Olive from a congregation of 50 to over 800 souls. He had baptized babies who were now graduating high school, married couples who now brought their own children to Sunday school, and buried grandparents whose families still filled entire pews every week. His sermons were legendary in the community, drawing visitors from 3 counties who came to hear his passionate delivery and profound wisdom. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Riley called out as the officers pushed him toward the door, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Remember what the Apostle Paul said when he was imprisoned. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice, this too shall pass." The sanctuary erupted. Sister Margaret Thompson, the church pianist whose arthritic fingers had played these same keys for 37 years, began a slow, mournful rendition of "We Shall Overcome." Her music filled the space like incense, wrapping around the congregation's grief and transforming it into something powerful and purposeful. One by one, voices joined hers, until the entire church swelled with song that seemed to lift the very roof beams. Deacon Charles Morrison, a Vietnam veteran whose Purple Heart sat proudly on his mantelpiece, stood with military precision. At 68, his back was still straight as a board, his white mustache meticulously trimmed, his Sunday suit pressed to perfection. "This is not right," he announced, his bass voice cutting through the singing. "This church has been operating legally for over 70 years. We have every permit required by law, filed in triplicate, updated annually without fail." Young Marcus Riley Jr., the pastor's 19-year-old son, home from Morehouse College, pulled out his smartphone with hands that shook only slightly. "I'm live streaming this," he announced to the officers, his finger already pressing record. "The world needs to see what's happening here today." The officers exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for the organized resistance they were encountering. They had expected compliance, submission, perhaps some tears and pleading. Instead, they faced a community that had been tested by decades of struggle and had emerged stronger each time, their faith forged in fires that would have reduced lesser spirits to ash. As the patrol car disappeared around the corner with Pastor Riley in the back seat, The congregation began to move with a coordination that spoke of deep bonds and shared purpose. Sister Denise Williams, a nurse at City General Hospital, immediately began organizing. "We need lawyers," she announced, her crisp white uniform somehow making her words carry more weight. "We need media attention, and we need to get down to that police station right now." The transformation was remarkable to witness. Within 20 minutes, the quiet Sunday morning had become a mobilization that would have impressed military strategists. Deacon Morrison took charge of transportation, his years of logistics training in the Army serving him well. "Church bus leaves in 5 minutes for the station," he announced. "Private cars follow behind. Nobody goes alone. Nobody gets left behind." Mrs. Beatrice Johnson, whose granddaughter was a reporter for Channel 7 News, already had her phone pressed to her ear. "Keisha, baby, you need to get down to the 15th precinct right now. They just arrested Pastor Riley right in the middle of service. And I'm telling you, this is going to be big news." Her voice carried the authority of a woman who had raised 8 children and countless grandchildren, who had seen civil rights marches and voting drives, who knew injustice when she saw it and wasn't about to let it pass unchallenged. The exodus from Mount Olive Baptist Church that Sunday morning looked like something from the history books. Men in their finest suits, women in their church dresses and Sunday hats, children clutching their parents' hands with wide, uncertain eyes, all flowing out of the sanctuary with determination etched on their faces. The church bells, operated by ancient clockwork that Deacon Morrison maintained himself, began to toll in slow, measured beats that seemed to call the entire neighborhood to witness. By the time the first caravan of church members reached the 15th precinct, word had spread through the community like wildfire. Social media posts were multiplying by the minute. "Pastor arrested during Sunday service," trending on local Twitter feeds. Facebook pages exploding with outrage and calls for action. The local news vans were already setting up their equipment on the sidewalk across from the station, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical prayers. Inside the precinct, Pastor Riley sat in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. His Sunday robes wrinkled, but his spirit unbroken. He had seen the inside of jail cells before, during his college days when he participated in protests against police brutality. But never had he imagined he would be here under such circumstances. The irony was not lost on him that he was being held for allegedly violating the very laws that protected his congregation's right to worship. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 20-year veteran of the force with a reputation for fairness and thorough investigation, was having serious doubts about the arrest she had just witnessed. She had been called in to process the paperwork, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. Mount Olive Baptist Church was one of the most respected institutions in the community. Pastor Riley was known for his community outreach programs, his food banks that fed hundreds of families every month, his scholarship fund that had sent dozens of young people to college. "What exactly were the circumstances of this arrest?" she asked Officer Jenkins, who was filling out forms with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this too many times before. "Anonymous tip," Jenkins replied without looking up. "Someone called in a complaint about unpermitted religious gatherings causing a disturbance." Detective Martinez frowned. On a Sunday morning, at a church that's been operating in the same location since 1953. She pulled up the permit records on her computer, her fingers clicking rapidly across the keyboard. What she found made her frown deepen into a scowl of disbelief. Outside, the crowd was growing by the minute. What had started as a few dozen church members had swelled to include neighbors, community leaders, and supporters from across the city. Someone had brought a portable sound system, and speakers began addressing the crowd with voices that carried the weight of righteous anger. "We will not be intimidated," declared Councilwoman Patricia Davis, whose own grandmother had been a founding member of Mount Olive. We will not allow our sacred spaces to be violated. We will not permit our spiritual leaders to be criminalized for the simple act of preaching the gospel. Her words were met with thunderous applause and shouts of "Amen" that seemed to shake the very foundations of the precinct building. Young Marcus Jr. was still live streaming, his follower count climbing rapidly as the video was shared across multiple platforms. "This is about more than just my father," he told the camera, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "This is about every person of faith who has ever been targeted for their beliefs. This is about every community that has been told they don't belong, that their voices don't matter. We're here to say that they do matter, that we all matter." Inside the precinct, Detective Martinez was making phone calls that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. Her first call was to the city attorney's office, where paralegal Robert Chen answered on the second ring. "I need you to pull the religious assembly permits for Mount Olive Baptist Church on Elm Street," she said without preamble. "Something doesn't add up here." Her second call was to Captain Williams, who was enjoying what he had hoped would be a peaceful Sunday morning at home with his family. "Captain, we've got a situation brewing down here that you need to know about. We arrested Pastor Riley this morning, and there's a crowd of about 200 people outside the station demanding his release." Captain Williams, a man who had navigated the treacherous waters of community policing for nearly 3 decades, felt his stomach drop. "Pastor Riley Marcus Riley, from Mount Olive." "On what charges?" When Martinez explained the circumstances, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, she wondered if the call had been dropped. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the captain finally said, his voice grim. "And Martinez, start pulling everything you can find on this anonymous tip. Something stinks about this whole situation." The crowd outside continued to grow, now numbering in the hundreds. Local merchants had closed their shops to join the demonstration. The owner of Johnson's Soul Food, famous throughout the city for his Sunday fried chicken special, had brought cases of bottled water for the protesters. Mrs. Gladys Thompson, who ran the community center's after-school program, had organized the children into a choir that sang freedom songs with voices that could melt stone. It was then that the first shocking revelation emerged. Robert Chen called Detective Martinez back with information that sent ripples of disbelief through the precinct. "Detective, I've got those permit records you requested, and you're not going to believe this. Mount Olive Baptist Church doesn't just have all their permits in order, they're actually ahead of their renewal schedule. Every document is filed perfectly, every fee paid in full, every inspection passed with flying colors." Martinez felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "Are you absolutely certain?" "I'm looking at documents that go back 15 years. Chen replied, "This church is probably the most legally compliant religious institution in the entire city. If we arrest Pastor Riley for unpermitted assembly, we'd have to arrest every priest, rabbi, and imam in town." The detective's hands were already moving toward her keyboard, pulling up the details of the anonymous tip that had triggered this entire disaster. What she found made her blood run cold. The call had come from a blocked number at exactly 8:47 a.m., just 17 minutes before the morning service was scheduled to begin. The caller had specifically requested that the arrest be made during the service, claiming it was the only time the illegal activities occurred. But it was the audio recording of the call that revealed the most damaging information. The voice was female, educated, with a slight accent that Detective Martinez recognized from years of living in the city. More importantly, there was background noise on the recording, the distinctive sound of a car engine, specifically a luxury sedan, and the faint melody of classical music playing on a high-end stereo system. Captain Williams arrived at the precinct looking like a man heading to his own execution. He took one look at the crowd outside, now numbering close to 400 people and growing by the minute, and knew that his department was about to face a crisis that could destroy careers and shatter community trust that had taken decades to build. "Brief me," he told Martinez, leading her into his office and closing the door against the growing noise from outside. When she finished explaining what she had discovered, the captain's face had gone gray as old newspaper. "You're telling me we arrested one of the most respected religious leaders in the community based on a bogus anonymous tip, in full view of his entire congregation, while he was conducting a perfectly legal worship service?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but the fury in it was unmistakable. "It gets worse, Captain," Martinez replied, pulling up the audio file on her computer. "I think I know who made the call." The voice that emerged from the computer speakers was crisp, authoritative, and dripping with the kind of entitled indignation that made both officers wince. "I want to report an illegal gathering at Mount Olive Baptist Church on Elm Street. They're conducting unpermitted religious activities and creating a public disturbance. I demand that you send officers immediately to shut them down and arrest whoever is responsible." Captain Williams closed his eyes. "That's Karen Hoffman." Detective Martinez nodded grimly. Karen Hoffman was a name that appeared in police files with disturbing regularity. A real estate developer with political aspirations and a seemingly endless supply of complaints about her neighbors. She had been trying to purchase the block where Mount Olive Baptist Church stood for the past 3 years. Her development company, Hoffman Properties, wanted to build a luxury shopping complex on the site, but the church had refused every offer to sell. "She's been filing nuisance complaints against that church for months," Martinez continued, pulling up a thick file of reports. "Noise violations during choir practice, claims of illegal parking during services, complaints about children playing in the churchyard. Every single complaint has been investigated and found to be without merit." The captain was already reaching for his phone. "Get the city attorney on the line. Get the mayor on the line. And for God's sake, get Pastor Riley out of that cell before this turns into a riot." Outside, the demonstration had taken on the character of a revival meeting. Sister Margaret Thompson had somehow managed to transport the church's portable keyboard to the scene, and the singing that rose from the crowd could be heard for blocks in every direction. Local news crews were interviewing anyone willing to speak, and the live coverage was being picked up by national networks as social media continued to amplify the story. "This is about more than one arrest," declared Dr. James Washington, a professor of African American studies at the local university and one of Pastor Riley's closest friends. "This is about a pattern of harassment directed at institutions that serve our community. This is about using the power of law enforcement to intimidate and silence voices that some people find inconvenient." The crowd responded with cheers and calls for justice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the precinct building. Someone had brought a banner that read, "Faith Under Attack," in letters 3 feet tall, and it was being held aloft by a dozen volunteers whose faces showed a mixture of anger and determination that spoke of deep wells of strength drawn from generations of struggle. Inside the precinct, the phone calls were flying fast and furious. City Attorney Michael Brennan was having the worst Sunday of his career as he tried to explain to increasingly angry city officials how his department had allowed such a colossal mistake to occur. Mayor Patricia Thompson, no relation to the church pianist, but equally passionate about justice, was demanding answers that nobody seemed able to provide. "Let me understand this correctly," the mayor said in a voice that could have frozen boiling water. "We arrested a pastor during Sunday service, based on a false complaint, filed by a developer who has been harassing the church for years, in front of hundreds of witnesses, including children. And now, we have a crowd of angry citizens demanding justice outside the police station. Is that an accurate summary of the situation? City Attorney Brennan could only manage a weak, "Yes, Your Honor," before the mayor continued her verbal assault. And this entire debacle is being broadcast live on social media and picked up by national news outlets, making our city look like a backward municipality that targets religious minorities for harassment. The silence that followed was answer enough. The mayor's next words carried the weight of executive authority backed by righteous fury. "I want Pastor Riley released immediately. I want a formal apology issued by the department. I want a full investigation into how this happened. And I want whoever is responsible for this mess held accountable to the fullest extent of the law." But the most dramatic revelation was yet to come. Detective Martinez, digging deeper into the background of the anonymous tip, had discovered something that changed the entire complexion of the case. Using advanced audio analysis software, she had isolated the background sounds from Karen Hoffman's call and made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the precinct. "Captain, you need to see this," she called out, her voice tight with excitement and disgust. "I ran the audio through our enhancement software, and there's something else on that recording. Voices in the background, multiple speakers. This wasn't just Karen Hoffman making a complaint. This was a planned conspiracy." The enhanced audio revealed fragments of conversation that painted a picture of calculated malice. "Get them out by next month. Property values will skyrocket. Make sure the arrest is public." The voices belonged to people Martinez recognized from city council meetings and development board hearings. People with significant political and economic power who had found a way to weaponize the criminal justice system for their own purposes. Captain Williams listened to the enhanced recording with growing horror and rage. This wasn't just a case of mistaken enforcement. This was a deliberate abuse of police power orchestrated by people who should have known better. "Get me everything you can find on Hoffman Properties and their development plans for that block," he ordered. "And start preparing arrest warrants. If they want to play games with the law, they're about to learn that the law cuts both ways." Outside, the crowd had begun to organize into something more powerful than a mere protest. Deacon Morrison, drawing on his military experience, had established a command structure with communication teams, media liaisons, and logistics coordinators. Mrs. Johnson's granddaughter had arrived with her news crew, and her live reports were being broadcast across the region, drawing supporters from neighboring cities who were making their way to the scene. This is Keisha Johnson reporting live from outside the 15th Precinct, where hundreds of supporters have gathered to demand the release of Pastor Marcus Riley. The young reporter announced to her television audience, "What started as a quiet Sunday morning service has become a powerful demonstration of community solidarity in the face of what many are calling a clear abuse of police power." The demonstration was attracting attention from far beyond the local community. Civil rights organizations were mobilizing, legal advocacy groups were dispatching lawyers, and religious leaders from across the region were issuing statements of support. The hashtag #Justice for Pastor Riley was trending nationally, and social media was flooding with messages of solidarity from people who understood that what happened to Mount Olive Baptist Church could happen to any community that lacked sufficient political protection. Inside his cell, Pastor Riley had been quietly praying and reflecting on the morning's events. He had seen injustice before, had preached about it from the pulpit, had counseled families devastated by it, but experiencing it firsthand gave him a new perspective on the courage required to face such systems of oppression. When Detective Martinez finally came to release him, his first words were not of anger or bitterness, but of concern for his congregation. "Are my people safe?" he asked as the cell door swung open. No one was hurt during the arrest. The children weren't traumatized. His genuine care for others, even in the midst of his own ordeal, reminded Martinez of why this man commanded such loyalty and respect from his community. "They're all fine, Pastor," she assured him, leading him toward the exit. "And they're all outside waiting for you." The moment Pastor Riley emerged from the precinct building, the crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard for miles. Children broke away from their parents to run toward him, their Sunday clothes rumpled from the long wait, but their faces shining with joy and relief. Adults wept openly, their emotions overwhelming their composure as they saw their spiritual leader walking free, his dignity intact, despite the humiliation he had endured. "My brothers and sisters," Pastor Riley called out, his voice carrying easily over the crowd without amplification. "Today, we have witnessed both the worst and the best of humanity. We have seen how fear and greed can corrupt even institutions designed to protect us. But we have also seen how faith and community can overcome any challenge, how love can triumph over hate, how justice can prevail when good people stand together." The crowd listened in rapt attention as their pastor continued, his words carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom and unshakable faith. "We will not respond to hatred with hatred. We will not answer injustice with vengeance. But we will demand accountability. We will insist on transparency. And we will never, ever allow anyone to silence our voices or diminish our faith." Captain Williams chose that moment to emerge from the building, his face showing the strain of the most difficult day of his career. He approached the crowd with the slow, deliberate steps of a man carrying a heavy burden, his uniform crisp despite the chaos of the morning. When he reached Pastor Riley, he stopped and did something that surprised everyone present. Including himself, he removed his cap and bowed his head. "Pastor Riley, on behalf of the entire police department, I offer you our deepest and most sincere apology," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "What happened here today was wrong. It was a violation of your rights, an abuse of police power, and a betrayal of the trust this community has placed in us. We will do everything in our power to make this right." The captain's words were met with a mixture of surprise and cautious approval from the crowd. Some people nodded, recognizing the courage it took for a police official to make such a public admission of error. Others remained skeptical, their trust too damaged by years of disappointment to be restored by words alone. Pastor Riley, however, responded with the grace that had made him beloved throughout the community. "Captain Williams, I appreciate your apology, and I accept it in the spirit in which it is offered. But apologies, while necessary, are not sufficient. We need to understand how this happened, who was responsible, and what safeguards will be put in place to prevent it from happening again." The pastor's response revealed the strategic mind that had built Mount Olive from a small congregation into a community powerhouse. He understood that this moment represented an opportunity not just for personal vindication, but for systemic change that could benefit countless others. "We want to work with you to ensure that no other religious community, no other leader, no other group of peaceful citizens ever experiences what we went through today." It was then that Detective Martinez stepped forward with the evidence that would transform the entire situation from a story of police misconduct into a tale of corruption and conspiracy. Pastor Riley, Captain Williams, and members of the community, what I'm about to share with you will shock you. But it's important that you know the truth about what really happened here today. The detective's revelation of the planned conspiracy sent shockwaves through the crowd. The discovery that Karen Hoffman and her associates had deliberately fabricated charges against the church, timed specifically to maximize public humiliation, revealed a level of calculated malice that left many people speechless with anger. But it was the broader implications that truly staggered the community. The realization that their criminal justice system could be so easily manipulated by people with money and political connections. This goes beyond a simple mistake, or even misconduct, declared Councilwoman Davis, her voice carrying the authority of her office and the passion of her convictions. This is criminal conspiracy. This is abuse of power. This is exactly the kind of corruption that destroys faith in our democratic institutions. The crowd's mood shifted from celebration to determination as the full scope of the injustice became clear. This wasn't just about Pastor Riley or Mount Olive Baptist Church. This was about the vulnerability of every community organization, every minority institution, every group that lacked sufficient political protection from predatory developers and corrupt officials. Young Marcus Jr., still live-streaming the events, addressed his growing online audience with maturity beyond his years. What you're witnessing here today is bigger than one arrest, bigger than one church, bigger than one community. This is about whether we live in a society where justice can be bought and sold, where the powerful can use the law as a weapon against the powerless. We're here to say that we won't accept that kind of society. The demonstration continued to grow throughout the afternoon. As word spread across the region and supporters arrived from neighboring cities and towns, religious leaders from all faiths came to stand in solidarity with Pastor Riley. Civil rights organizations set up information tables and legal aid stations. Community groups organized food and water distribution for the protesters who were settling in for what promised to be a long fight. But the most significant development came when Mayor Thompson arrived at the scene, accompanied by the full city council and a phalanx of attorneys and investigators. Her presence signaled that this was no longer a local police matter, but a citywide crisis that demanded immediate and comprehensive action. "Citizens of our great city," the mayor announced, her voice amplified by the portable sound system that had been providing music and announcements throughout the day. What happened here today represents a failure of our systems, a betrayal of our values, and a violation of the trust you have placed in your elected officials. I am here to announce that we will not rest until justice is served. The mayor's announcement of immediate actions sent ripples of approval through the crowd. The suspension of the officers involved in the arrest, pending a full investigation, the appointment of a special prosecutor to examine the conspiracy allegations, the establishment of a citizen review board to oversee police procedures regarding religious institutions. Each announcement was met with cheers and applause that reflected the community's hunger for meaningful change. But it was the mayor's final announcement that brought the crowd to its feet in thunderous applause. Furthermore, I am pleased to announce that the city will be awarding Mount Olive Baptist Church a special community service grant of $50,000. In recognition of their decades of service to our city, and as a small token of our regret for the injustice they suffered today. Pastor Riley stood before his community, his congregation, his supporters, and his family, feeling the weight of the day's events settling on his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. The morning had begun with a simple worship service and had evolved into something much larger, a moment of reckoning for an entire city, a test of character for all involved, and an opportunity for transformation that could echo through generations. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd that had grown to nearly 1,000 people. "Today we learned that faith without action is empty, that justice delayed is justice denied, but also that communities united in common cause are more powerful than any force arrayed against them. We came here seeking the release of one pastor, but we achieved something much greater. We reminded our city, our region, and ourselves that ordinary people committed to extraordinary principles can move mountains." As the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to reflect the fire of justice that had been kindled that day. The crowd began to disperse, but they left with something they hadn't possessed that morning: a renewed sense of their own power, a deeper understanding of their community's strength, and an unshakable conviction that when people of conscience stand together, no force on earth can prevail against them. The investigation that followed would reveal the full extent of the conspiracy against Mount Olive Baptist Church, leading to criminal charges against Karen Hoffman and 3 of her associates. The officers involved in the arrest would face disciplinary action and retraining, while new protocols would be established to prevent the weaponization of police power for private gain. But perhaps, most importantly, the events of that Sunday morning would become a rallying cry for communities across the nation facing similar challenges. A reminder that justice is not a gift bestowed by the powerful, but a right claimed by the determined. Mount Olive Baptist Church would continue to serve its community with renewed vigor and expanded programs funded by the city grant and private donations that poured in from supporters around the world. Pastor Riley would use his experience to advocate for criminal justice reform and community protection laws, and the congregation would forever remember the Sunday when their faith was tested and emerged stronger, when their community was attacked and stood firm, when their voices were silenced and rang out louder than ever before. In years to come, children who witnessed that day would tell their own children about the morning when their pastor was arrested and their community rose up in response, about the power of peaceful protest and collective action, about the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or dangerous. They would carry forward the lessons learned in that moment of crisis, ensuring that the flame of justice kindled that Sunday morning would continue to burn bright for generations yet to come. The story of Pastor Marcus Riley and Mount Olive Baptist Church became more than just a tale of one community's struggle against injustice. It became a testament to the enduring power of faith, the strength of unity, and the possibility of transformation that exists whenever ordinary people commit themselves to extraordinary change. In a world often dominated by cynicism and despair, it stood as proof that hope is not foolish, that courage is not futile, and that justice, however delayed, will ultimately prevail when good people refuse to remain silent in the face of wrong.